Abumwata n'ụlọ nne m inine. Abumwata n'ụlọ nne m inine. Nneka has grown into a beautiful woman. All the eligible men in the village and beyond desired to have her as a wife, but could not because she was an Osu. Every morning, Nneka would be seen walking to the stream and humming a song with her melodious voice. Eventually, some men decided that they did not care if she was Osu and went ahead to ask for her hand in marriage, regardless of the consequences. But Nneka turned all of them down. She has long since decided that she was not going to give love to any villager except her parents, and she was not receiving any either. The other women were growing increasingly jealous of her. How is it that men they would do anything to get are all falling on the feet of Nneka and Osu, asking for her hand in marriage? It must be sorcery, they would say among themselves. After all, isn't her family a servant to an Agbara? They often said this to her hearing as she passes by. But Nneka remains unbothered, usually paying them no mind at all. After all, she lives in a little world of her own, where all is well, and their vile and unkind words cannot reach. It will always puzzle the villagers how Nneka would manage to keep a warm smile and sing ever so joyfully at all times. Nneka continued to turn down the many suitors that came for her hand in marriage. But one remained the most persistent out of the lot. His name was Okudili, a merchant trader. He waited for Nneka at her path to the stream most mornings and would continue to woo Nneka until she grew weary of ignoring him. She would begin to find things she liked about Okudili because he was such a charming man, and would eventually accept his marriage proposal. Nneka, now settling into her new role as a wife, did everything to please her husband, and he in turn showered Nneka with love, attention, and lots of gifts. And although Nneka was not entirely accepted still in the village, and her husband was now meted with the same cruelty Nneka has known all her life, they continued to live happy lives, or so it seemed. After a while, Nneka's husband began to grow very moody and withdrawn, and would sometimes not even bother speaking to her. He was no longer invited to town meetings. His family no longer talked to him because he defiled them by marrying her, and he was now also seen as an Osu. Nneka, now with child, grew gravely worried, as she could feel her husband's love towards her begin to wane, and her once loving and thoughtful husband has become increasingly resentful towards her. One day, as Nneka was busy preparing the meal for supper, Okudili angrily storms in, grabbing Nneka by her arm, hysterically shouting into her face and accusing her of ruining his life. At first, Nneka tried to pacify him, but he only grew more violent. Now, Nneka let herself get angry. After all, she was happy being on her own before he came and literally begged her to marry him. With all the strength she could muster, Nneka pushes her husband off her. This only seemed to infuriate him as he began to hit her. Nneka tried to ward off his punches from touching her already protruding stomach, but unfortunately she could not and ended up miscarrying. Overtaken by grief, Nneka falls into a deep depression and would no longer care for herself nor her husband. Eventually, her husband sends her out of the house, now completely tired of her. Once again, Nneka is left abandoned and distraught, wondering if pain is all that fate has for her.